So what I have done in order to teach you how to write an analytic strategy section is write up a handy dandy example for the most common statistical tests that you might need to do based on what your variable types are. And I have referred to examples of those data sets that I walked you through when I was showing you, data types in real world data. So let me share my screen and get started giving you a little orientation through this, but just know it will be a Word document posted to Canvas that you can take a look at, and you can download and look at those spreadsheets used in it as well. So here are my two different spreadsheet data sets that I referred to in the section where we talked about variable types. And we've got the one that's about social media and happiness. It's labeled Social Need Hap. And it's got all these questions about age, education level, gender, whether people have social media, how often they post on social media, how much time they spend on there, how they feel afterwards, and whether they feel lonely or whether they feel confident. So I will be referring to in my examples that I've written out some of the variables in this data set. And then for one of the tests, for the multiple regression, I have used a different data set because a multiple regression would need 3 continuous variables, and we just don't have that many continuous variables in this social media happiness data set. So this is the misophonia data set that I told you about, where I gave people those questionnaires about their responses to sounds that can be upsetting to them. And then there were some questions about mindfulness that were kind of summed up. So let me just give you a brief orientation to these variables. There's subject ID, which is categorical, gender, that's categorical, age, that's continuous, race, which is categorical, education, which is categorical but ordinal, not nominal. Country is categorical and nominal, as well as US state. And then we have M1 triggers, which is their average sensitivity to misophonia triggers. So they rated on a scale of 0 to 4, like how strong their reaction is to each of 7 triggers. And then I averaged their response to all 7 triggers together. So that is what is in this column. And I'm calling that average sensitivity to misophonia triggers. So that's one of the variables, continuous variables in that multiple regression example that you need to keep an eye out for if that is an example of statistics you might need to do with the variable types you have. And then what I have here are subscales on the 5-facet mindfulness questionnaire, which I also described in the data types section. So there were 39 items on the mindfulness questionnaire. I deleted all of those and just gave you the summary variables. So we added some of those questions together and got the observation subscale. How good are people at observing their inner experience? There's one for describing how aware they are of their actions, how non-judgmental they are of what they find when they sort of meditate or become aware of what they're doing, and then how much they react to their inner thoughts and what else they find when they kind of examine themselves. So the one that's used in that analysis is non-reactivity, and it's right here. So if you see non-reactivity referred to in the example analytic strategies document, that it's this M column here. So what's this document I've been talking about anyway? Analytic strategies? Let me show you what I've done. I have written up this Word document for you that has an example analytic strategy section where I was pretending that I was going to propose or conduct some kind of analyses using variables from either of those 2 data sets that I just showed you. And what you can do is figure out, using the other parts of this lecture series, which types of variables you have in your data and which type of analysis that means you should do. And once you do that, you can open this document and just click anywhere in the table of contents for the test that you need to do, and it's going to take you to an example of how to write one of those. So let's take a peek at our correlation example. I have written some notes for you here, and I put some comments as well if you forget any of the stuff in this lecture or whatever, but I have put some comments explaining the variable types and which data set they came from, and where exactly they are in that data set, and describe what those variables are and what they mean, whether they're continuous or categorical, etc., and which test that means you would do, and which test that means you would do. And then, so all this stuff is not stuff you would write in your paper. This is the part where it says example analytic strategy. Obviously yours is just going to say analytic strategy without the word example, is all right here. So what you can do is copy and paste this and plug in your variable names instead. So if you had a continuous variable that was, instead of age, it was something like depression score, you could just kind of plug and chug, right? So you could do the same for your dependent variable. So start by putting in your hypothesis, describe your variables. What's your independent variable? Describe whether it's continuous or categorical. If it's categorical, what categories does it have? And then do the same for the dependent variable. And if you have a covariate, there's examples for those as well. So just to give you a quick heads up that these tests of the ANCOVA or the multiple regression are only if you have a covariate, which not everybody will do. That's totally optional. So let's go back to our correlation example. So you're going to say then what test that means you're going to do, and I've given you specific language you could use to do that. Now, there are probably ways to reword and shorten my sentences. I just kind of churned these out as quickly as I could to get y'all the resources that you need. So please feel free to make your sentences more simple and clear or word them differently to paraphrase. But I understand that the paraphrasing with these analytic strategy sections is going to be way, way harder than paraphrasing other articles people have done and writing it in your introduction, because it's also dense and technical with the statistics, right? And sometimes there's not many different ways you can reword those statistics. So do your best, but I'm not going to be very strict about this section looking too similar to my writing, because I wrote it this way for you for a reason. So it's almost like a formula where you could just plug your variables into it and kind of go. So do your best to paraphrase, but that may not be very possible here, and that's totally okay. Like here where I say if the observed t statistic is lower than the reported critical value, that would mean, that's kind of cumbersome. You could reword it to say like a t statistic lower than the reported critical value would mean, so you could take out a few of those words. And what you're going to need to do to write this part is actually go and use GPower using the tutorials that I gave you in other parts of this lecture series to put how many participants you would need. And I have given examples of what things you need to plug into GPower here to remind you of how to do that. But that's also in my GPower tutorial video. And then it's going to give you a critical T value you can plug in there. It's going to give you degrees of freedom you can plug in there. It's going to give you number of participants that you would need as well in each group. Even if you have something where you have multiple groups like a t-test or an ANOVA, it tells you how many you would need in each group. And then you can so anywhere that I've put like XX whatever, that's numbers that you need to get from GPower and plug in yourself. But everything around it you could kind of talk about in pretty much the same way. Just make sure to explain what it would mean if you found a significant value. Is that going to support your hypothesis? If it was not significant, if it was like in the opposite direction you predicted, what that would mean. And I've done the same for all the other tests that you will most likely need to do: a t-test, a one-way ANOVA. There was that correlation we just looked at, chi-square, which doesn't have a power analysis, so it's going to look a little bit different. I walked you through doing a t-test power analysis and then modifying it a little bit to guess how many participants you might need for chi-square. And then these ANCOVA examples and multiple regression examples are for only if you have a covariate. So that's just a quick orientation to this document. Please let me know if you have any questions, or if you want me to look over your analytic strategy section ahead of time by sending me a draft, please don't hesitate to do that.